Everybody's on mute. You have a control panel, and you can either raise your hand, which somebody has already done. Good job. Not currently raised, but good job figuring that out. And then there's also a place where you can do the chat. So you found the chat. On the right of that, there's a Q&A box. And we have interpreters today. Thank you to our Spanish language interpreters. And also thank you to the person who's doing transcription for deaf participants. So thanks very much for being here. We are so glad that you're here, and we know that many of you need an evaluation, or excuse me, training certificate. So please fill out the questionnaire that will come up at the very end. It'll automatically pop up today. And then if you fill in who from your program attended today, then you can each make sure to get a training certificate. Okay, so that's our welcome. So who's here today? Oh, I'm super thrilled. Whoops. I'm super thrilled that we have Alma Goddard and oh, wait a second. I just remembered that I need to record this thing. Okay. Are we recording now? No, it says we're recording. Okay, I'm going on faith here, people. I'm super glad that we have today Alma Goddard from Mother Nation, and previously the resident artist at the Northwest Network for bi, trans, lesbian, and gay survivors of abuse, and Marci Taitt-Lamar, who is one of the coordinators, or kind of the coordinator, at the National LGBTQ Institute on Interpersonal Violence. Is it okay if I say a few words about you, or do you want to introduce yourself?
Go right ahead.
So Alma has been an active member of our movement to end violence against women for 35 years, over 35 years. She has worked at the Seattle Indian Health Board, Women's Spirit, Native Coalition, the Northwest Network, and so many other places. And she's just so highly respected for her advocacy, support groups, outreach, workshop and training work, and oh, and she won the Jeannie McCarthy Advocacy Award. Wow, that's amazing. And she's really, Alma, I'm just so, you're just an advocate's advocate.
Oh, thank you.
And then also, your work on historical and intergenerational trauma and healing has just been so helpful for our work in this state. And you've just been a spark of so much change. And now Alma is semi-retired, doing domestic violence advocacy training with Mother Nation, which is an urban Indian, Native survivor, culturally based program. And Marci Taitt-Lamar, MSW, is project coordinator at the National LGBTQ Institute, which is an amazing national project. And you are responsible for technical assistance and training, and also have facilitated a weekly all-gender DV support group and supervised MSP students, and gosh, done so many amazing things, especially around elevating and centering queer and trans communities of color and experiences of survival, and also amazing work around working around grief and death in communities. So thank you. And my name is Judy. I'm in the lower half of the slide right now, and I work at the Domestic Violence Coalition. Yay! Okay, so first up, we have a polling question for you. How comfortable do you feel? Oh gosh, the words didn't come out quite there. How comfortable do you feel facilitating support groups? And how often do you use creative expression, arts and crafts in support groups? Ooh, it's a live poll. Okay, so we've heard from about 3/4 of people, and wow, this is so great. So about half of you say you feel very comfortable. I don't know if you can see what the poll results are, so I'm going to just read them. About half of you say, yeah, I feel really comfortable facilitating support groups. About 1/3 of you say, it's okay. And 12% of you say it's either hard for me or I've never done it before. So especially want to welcome those of you who are saying it's hard for me or you've never done it before or you're feeling like just okay. And then the second polling question was, how often do you use creative expression, arts and crafts in your support groups? 12% of you said every single time. Just under half, well, I should say 3/4 say frequently or sometimes, and 15% said never done it. So that is really good to know. Okay. Okay, so that is really great to know. Let's talk about why creative expression can be so helpful in our work around advocacy and especially support groups. Do you want me to keep blabbing about this?
No.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Welcome, everyone. This is Alma, and I just want to say I feel blessed to be here and honored to be asked to do this webinar. I have, Judy said I semi-retired. I considered I retired. However, you can't take the advocacy out of the advocate. So I'm still working, and you know, when you have a passion for people, it's hard to stop working. So I have a passion for everyone, and I really want to express my appreciation for you doing the work that you're doing. It's very challenging work. It's especially challenging to do self-care and not take on secondary trauma, and I'm glad you're all here. I just wanted to say a little something before we address the subject. And I'll introduce Marci now. Marci, do you want to just in your introduction about this?
Oh, yeah.
Sorry.
Hello, everyone. So happy to be here, especially with Alma. Alma and I have been presenting on this content for a little while now, and it's my favorite content that we offer the world. In some of our, I mean, we'll dive into our approach, and I would say at its simplest, creative expression is another tool in our toolbox, and we will dive a little bit deeper as to why we think it's so important in helping the folks we work with navigate and work through trauma. Alma, how about you kick us off here?
Okay. So I consider myself old school. I still believe in guiding principles of a movement that I have long been a part of, the battered women's movement for change of how we're often mistreated in the most valuable, closest relationships that we have. I've been doing support groups for a number of years, and it's been an evolutionary process. So just in description of maybe one of my former support groups, I was very structured, and we will get into structure of support groups and specifically tools that we use in the art interventions and just free art expression. So I tended to believe that the more structure I had in the group, the better it would be for people. And in some ways that was true, because I had experiences of either being in a group or facilitating a group where just in the opening, people have so much to say and so much trauma to process that it often feels like no one gets heard, or one person may have more time than the next person. So my groups, I tried to create an environment of equality, and how I structured it was giving information about domestic violence. What is it? How does it work? Why does it work? What's happening to me in this relationship? What is a healthy relationship? All of those kinds of topics I had, and I would present. And then the women would share their experiences and talk, and I would divide the time equally so everyone had an equal chance if they chose to do so. So that's kind of like a basic outline of the groups that I was doing. So the main thing that I want to say about the difference, or how I want to say what a support group does right off. Old school, it breaks isolation. That's old school. That's still true today. And so just the act of 2 or more people getting together is very, very powerful experience. It breaks the isolation of an often devastating relationship that has been so hurtful. And when we shift into using art and creativity into the groups, and when I started bringing those in, I remembered that the act of creating brings us back to our connections. And that's the basis of the work that I now have tried to implement in the support groups that I've led. So I've got some more points about that, but I think Marci has some to talk about too.
Thank you, Alma. So the Northwest Network, the way that our group is structured is we tend to have about half of the group as talking and going over intros and beginning. It's a bit more structured in the first half, and the second half is usually dedicated to an activity, oftentimes an art activity, but it can also be DV education, reading an article. It can be a number of things based on how we're flexing towards the dynamic of the group. Creative expression for us is such a pivotal, significant way to work with folks around retelling their stories, reclaiming experiences. It's a new way of folks being able to express themselves, where they are, talk about their experience. And I think most importantly, what makes us stick out above or in parallel to support groups that are just regular standard advocacy is that it allows us to communicate with ourselves in a way that simply talking or other forms of advocacy don't necessarily do similarly. And so being able to do that kind of introspection and communicating with ourselves. And we know that healing itself is a creative process, and creative expression and art in particular really lends itself well to being able to use metaphors as an example to give us familiar experiences that really put our own experiences into different contexts. And so being able to use like metaphors is one example of giving us symbols and context to use for our experiences. Other examples, we use like trees in support group oftentimes, like what are our roots, what's holding us up.
Also, using art or projects or artistic or creative interventions, there are studies that show that it validates your past experiences, and it also promotes not only emotional expression but emotional expansion. And by honoring your experience, and it gives you an opportunity to tell your story in a way that you haven't tried to tell it before necessarily. It might be a more effective way for you to be seen or heard. So those are some of the ways that it validates. It also validates your states of awareness. You know, what kinds of awarenesses do you have, even in the place where you're having your art or doing your art? You know, are you vigilant? Or is the participant vigilant? Are they upset? Are they nervous? I mean, there are a lot of components that you as an advocate, just facilitating this process can validate with very few words. It also examines art and creation, helps you to look at your own reactions and responses and be that reflective, you know, gives you an opportunity to be constantly reflective. So those are some of the points around some of the studies that validate the experiences, promote the emotional expression. And promoting the emotional expression in art is a very physical, it's encompassing of all directions of life, I believe. That because, well, I have a foundation of belief that all of us were born whole and complete and enough already. And that's what I bring to the support group, just holding that out for everyone. And you will have people that come to an art group, an art-based support group that say, well, I'm not an artist. I can't do that. That's not me. And they already have had a lot of perhaps blocks and negativity about who they're being, and they probably often think they're not enough, they're not good enough, you know, everything that trauma produces, we come to these groups with. So I think it's important to hold out for the people attending your groups, hold out that they were born enough, whole, and complete, and that the expression of that is their creativity, and that is a part of their wholeness and their healing.
Wow, that's deep. Thank you. So what you have here on your slide is these two T-shirts from the Clothesline Project, which is a really low barrier, you know, everybody can participate kind of thing without feeling pressure around art. And one of the T-shirts says, this is what it was like living with you, and it has bloody hands on it and like some sort of craft material that makes it look like blood. And that to me just says so much more than someone could say with words about what it was like living with their person. And the other T-shirt says, the cycle stops here and now, free at last, which is, you know, another, you know, for the idea of someone to wear that on their body really is very moving to me.
I can give some context too that the Northwest Network, we usually during Pride Month, so June, we dedicate a few weeks for survivors at our DV support group to make these shirts. It's a really collective group experience, so it's I would consider to be an opportunity for group art where folks can really like talk things out. It's certainly breaking isolation where folks are talking about, you know, what are you thinking about writing, what experience are you wanting to do or wanting to show and contribute to the installation. And then people get to utilize so many different kinds of mediums. We have so many different sort of art supplies that folks can add to their shirt. Some people don't write words at all. They just paint pictures, and it is totally illustrating the point that they want. And at the end of Pride weekend, these shirts are installed during our Dyke March, where folks can walk through and see all of the different shirts that are hung up from years of our DV support group members contributing.
Thank you so much, Marci. And I'm going to have some more, we're going to show people how they can learn more about doing their own clothesline project.
Awesome.
So I just want to, go ahead.
I was seeing that some people aren't comfortable with leading an art-based support group because they're not either artistic or feel artistic or creative themselves. I think that that's something that could be actually shared with a group, and realize that the purpose is not to become artists. It's to accept that we have this amazing ability to heal ourselves through our creativity, somehow conveying that. But we as advocates also need to be proactive in self-care, and it might be a good idea in your offices or your organizations to have some art-free days where you just come in, get an hour to create, or you know, do something with your staff so you all can get more creative, more comfortable with creating, and then translate that into your group.
Well, I'm definitely in the camp of I can't go without a plan. So, but we're going to talk about how to have a plan
Right.
for those of us who are attached to that.
Plan and structure is good.
Yes, you're with me. Keep plan for people. So, this is Judy again. I wanted to also just, share, we wanted to share a few more ideas about why creative expression, and one of them is that trauma, the impact of trauma is more than just the experience of violence. The impact of trauma often goes beyond what anyone can express with words and conversation. And I think that these two art pieces, Alma, that you blessed us with, these images really express that of, someone could describe what it's like to run away with their children or what it's like to be strangled. But it's only when we look at these art pieces that you've made with clay. And Alma, are you a trained artist?
No.
Yeah, so you just,
no.
Like,
this is just
practicing.
Yeah, well, this is just things that come to me. I consider this advocate's art.
Wow.
I've had reasons to get this secondary trauma out, and this is how I express myself. Because of the stories, I have a story to tell too. And the piece on the strangulation piece is actually a temporary art, and I destroyed it after I photographed it. And I think that there are things that you can do with your finished pieces. Create ceremony if you don't have ceremony. You can destroy them if you want. I mean, there are a lot of things you can do with your creations that can help your healing process.
That's deep. Thank you very much for sharing that. I think of that as like writing things down and then burning it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So creative expression also helps us reconnect to ourselves. And, I think we hear a lot from survivors about how, they're not sure a lot of times if what they're saying is like, will anyone believe me? But also, did I make any of this up? Like, is it really true? Like, maybe I'm, the survival of violence and the traumatic impacts oftentimes are so disorganizing. You know, it destroys our inner core. For a lot of people, it's hard to like make sense of what happened. And sometimes when people are talking, it just doesn't seem like it makes sense. And I think that I will say, for me, seeing the art a lot of times makes sense out of an experience that doesn't make any sense at all, right? That shouldn't have happened in the first place. And that I think that what I've noticed is that it can help people be in charge of telling their own story rather than someone has to listen to me in order for it to be true. I can make the art or make the craft or whatever it is, and then nobody needs to listen for it to be true.
Mm-hmm.
Anything more you wanted to say about this? I think when we get to the storytelling. Okay, great. So we just want to pause and see about questions and comments. Deidre, are there more questions and comments?
One person just wrote, Shauna wrote, I'm in the process of formatting a support group. I am implementing some sensory activities. I feel engaging into the mindful creativity can assist with healing through expression.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
I think that's such a powerful thing. We often don't think about tactiles and sensory.
What's tactile?
Tactile things you can touch.
Okay.
Yeah. Sensory-based activities are really important for this process, because when the trauma sets in, the trauma doesn't just go to your brain. It doesn't just go to your heart. The trauma lodges into every aspect of your being. And so using every aspect of your being to heal includes your senses. And so doing water-based projects, doing nature-based projects, using materials from nature, even putting clay on a table, or if you're in a individual session with someone, not to digress, but you can have a piece of clay for someone to just be working when they're talking.
And that's very trauma-informed. You know, it gives people, I
don't know about that stuff. I haven't studied that much.
I'm sure other people here know more about it than I do. But from what little I understand, that especially for people who are struggling with dissociation, dissociation from their own body, that the touch can help people stay where we're in the now, and deal with just deal with the incredible amount of anxiety that people often are struggling with.
I think,
go ahead.
I think there are also really fun ways to be able to integrate, incorporate that. I don't currently facilitate our group and haven't for some time, but I know that some of our new facilitators are really great at creating, like we recently did, I think, like a tea mixing activity where one of our facilitators brought in some herbs, and we had some recipes, some mixes that folks can make based on what they were trying to do. Like there's a heart healing mix of tea, and so you can mix all of the ingredients. It gives you like a guide for how to do that for folks who are not. Folks like me who don't know how to mix tea.
So I just wanted to say a couple more things, go back to a statement I made before. The act of creating brings us back to our connections. It encompasses most aspects of our lives, body, mind, and spirit. We share everything our lives have to offer. I believe that everything in the universe is vibrating, and that every thought is a frequency, and creation, therefore, is always happening. And it's something that we can't stop, so we try and create for our groups positive experiences, positive outcomes. Art or creative expression can be the act of recovering our sacred selves, and I truly believe that. And I believe that creative expression is a bridge to those connections, our connections with life. Art and frequency. Frequency, everything is vibrating and has frequency in the universe. So creating elevates our vibration. creating brings us out of those places that have been hurtful. It makes us confront it. It brings us often back to our breath, because we're so quiet in creating, we can only hear our breath, and that comes out in our expression. Some of us are not used to breathing because of the trauma. This opens up, this can help. Every thought and every creation is always happening. Let's make it higher and higher frequencies for healing.
Thank you, Alma. That's really beautiful. I really appreciate you bringing in the spiritual element about our, the honoring of each survivor, and that it's not just about helping people as participants, but honoring them as individuals. Okay, now we're going to get into some more how-to.
Okay.
So,
we got those.
setup and facilitation. So, for those of you interested in the clothesline project, like Marci was saying, there's actually this website you can go to. I think it's clotheslineproject.org or something like that. And they have, this a guide that you can print out about how to do it. And then you can see so that's on the right, on the left part of the screen, the bandana project, which is something that has come out of Latinx communities, farm worker women who wear bandanas in their work in the fields to protect themselves from pesticides and dust, and also from bosses. And that this is decorating those bandanas is something that people have started doing as kind of like another version of the clothesline project. Other advice that you have about setup and facilitation when you're using creative expression?
Something that we make sure to integrate in our group is an opportunity to address conflict or any kind of feelings that folks have sat on from a previous group. We call that part of our group structure old business, and that happens pretty early on at the start of the group. I think it's really important, and I would hope that most groups have a space or something set up where folks can really address something that's come up for them in a way that is free of judgment and flexible. And that is where we can address conflict between group members, conflict between anything that was said. Sometimes people say, hey, I said this thing last week and I feel like it came across the wrong way, and actually what I meant to say was this. And similarly, people can talk about how the activity we did in the previous week impacted them. So people can really speak to some of the challenges around engaging in an art process that maybe felt difficult. That space is for people to just bring those things up. And I think that that's just more of the infrastructure piece of how to hold a space where people are engaging in new things and having to reflect on their experiences in new ways.
How do you deal with the domestic violence educational component?
So DV education happens naturally in our facilitation process, but it can also happen as part of the activity. We don't necessarily do art and creative expression every week as part of the activity in the second half of the group. So sometimes that can actually look like DV education. So we can talk about, here's some writing around gaslighting. So we may, let's say, for example, we may print out an article that resonated with one of our co-facilitators or an experience that someone may have shared the previous week.
Could you say what is gaslighting?
Gaslighting.
For people who are used to that term.
Yeah, sure. Gaslighting, it's the experience. I can only think of an example of just where you're second guessing your own reality and your own truth. And that's usually brought on by a partner who may be saying things like, that's not actually what happened, or
I didn't do that.
I didn't do that. It didn't actually happen that way. You're just overreacting. Right. So it's a very disorienting experience ultimately. And so maybe one of our co-facilitators found an article or a clip, like a YouTube clip that they wanted to share that talks about something around EV education, and then we can have a group talk about it. folks can have a small discussion. That could lead to an art activity. We could have folks write poems. We could have folks draw something that maybe like the experience of being gaslit is something that they have never had a name for, and this is their first time being able to put a name for that experience, and so maybe creating a self-portrait, post learning about their experience, something like that as an example. But yes, that's all to say that old business is a great thing to have in our structure.
Behavioral. Do you have behavioral guidelines?
Like just like rules.
Rules.
Group rules.
Rules.
We do. We have group rules
And expectations.
and expectations that folks we have set. They are iterative, so often we will always come back to these ground rules as we introduce new people, as the group evolves and group dynamics changes. We can always go back to that and say, look, we all agreed to approaching this group in from an anti-oppressive lens, and to be challenged when things come up. So I would say that those group rules are not set in stone, but they are fixed as the group agrees on them every time they reintroduce.
So I have a question. Well, we have a question from Rocio, which is, so is there a curriculum that you're using for this creative expression support group? Do you have, so you said, Marci, that you weave in the domestic violence education. Like, do you have like, okay, here's our 10-week or 12-week group, and you kind of sketch out like, week 1 we're going to do this, week 2 we're going to do this.
That's like a two-pronged question. We have a specific group that is more skills-based and very contained, and that is our group Thriving While Healing, which is a sexual assault support group, and that is far more fixed and definitely has a curriculum. This group, for our purpose and for the intent and what our goals are with the folks that we're working with, is not fixed in that way. There is no curriculum. We actually really prioritize flexibility and adapting to dynamic and adapting to need and what's coming up. And that's not to say that there's no preparation. Our staff our co-facilitators are very diligent about doing prep, support group prep, and coming up with activities that really speak to what's coming up.
This is Alma, if I could interrupt a little. I think that there are a number of different structures you can draw on for creating your support group. It's something that your agency needs to, you and the agency should be in alignment with. And I thought of questions to ask about when you are structuring a group, is what is the purpose of the group, which Marci talked about. What is the frame of reference for that, or that purpose that the agency supports, and do your advocates, or do you as an advocate support that? The support groups need to be relatable. So I see in the Bandana project was through the Latinx community, and it's culturally based. And at Mother Nation, we have culturally based creation projects. And so you have to find out who's at your table, who's coming to the group, who is the group for? Is it their group, or is it your group, or is it our group? I mean, these are just some questions to think about. Who's at the table? Then how do you set the table for the people that attend your group? Those are both personal questions and agency questions that need to be out front and part of the structure conversation at very least. And then in terms of closed or open groups, that's part of that. Who's the group for? What's the purpose? How do I set that? we can always get specific about the art projects, and there are a lot of resources online that present things like doing heart work, doing you know, specific traumas, doing physical workouts related to trauma. Can be a creative process of just in your art group getting up and doing body movement, moving around the room or something. So it's so expansive how you can set these groups up. You just have to figure out what's the purpose and can you achieve the goals of that.
Thanks so much. That's really amazing. So what I want to just say for someone who's really linear like me, what I'm hearing is that, I want to just check out with you, is that you could, like I could go with my regular curriculum and add in, you know, arts and creative expression and craft things to, not just like, here's an art project, but I think we're going to show in a few slides ways that you can talk about trauma that are not just talking, especially for people who, you know, like they've only just met each other. Do they really want to share like the most humiliating, most painful, traumatic experience that has happened to them with like, and talk about it?
Right.
So there's that part. Sorry. And then, but also like, I just love what you're saying, Alma, about, you know, let's also just go back to our support group plan and say, wow, is this really meeting people where they are? And am I imposing my plan on this group, or is it like that how am I making sure that it's meeting the needs of participants?
I'd say that's pretty much what we were saying, and thank you.
Thank you. This really, you two are so wise. Okay, so here's an example. I love this. So this is like a handout that you have, so it's blank, like like the black and white part is blank, and then the colored in part is what a participant did.
Yeah.
Can you talk about this one?
Yeah, this is a storytelling activity that we do. It's one of the, like, as we're introducing new folks into the group.
I'm sorry, I want to just pause so that interpreters, so that we can just read what's on the slide because it's in English. The slide says origin story. Could you read that part?
Oh yeah, so it says origin story, what brings you to this moment? Where does this journey begin for you? And then there is like a film reel or film negative, and 3 empty boxes, well, not 3 empty boxes, but there's 3 boxes. The first box has a tornado with a lightning striking it. The middle box has a person with what is looking like a sunset background and a very large question mark at the fore. And the last panel is what looks like a field, a beautiful sunbeam coming from the right corner to flowers coming up, blossoming from the grass with a little bird in the background. Under the first tornado panel, we see a scene description that says trauma. The middle panel with the question mark, the scene description says healing. And this panel with the flowers and sunbeams, the scene description says peace. This is a storytelling activity we do with folks. When I used to facilitate, we tended to do this one as we were introducing new people into the group. So shortly after a welcome group, and the group would have some new people, and so people were starting to do a little bit of norming and forming and learning about each other. This is a great intro to just like engaging with art as a beginner activity, because you not only get to reflect on your experiences and what you're trying to highlight about your story, you also get to create illustrations that really resonate with those experiences. And you get to pick and choose what from your story you're wanting to highlight. You see there are only three panels that folks have, and they don't actually need to be sequential. That's another thing is they can, and they often are, but as you can see, this person has just 3 different moments that they're highlighting, and we don't necessarily know where in their healing process, where in their experience of trauma these moments are. We can't tell that. Only they can share that story. And so there's a lot of, it's a very malleable exercise. It's a very flexible one, and so people can really interpret it how they want. And I think that's kind of the beauty of how we're using creative expression in this particular activity.
So one of the things I noticed, could I ask a question?
Sure.
So one of the things I noticed is that this feels really different than an advocate saying, okay, today's topic is gaslighting, you know, or as you were talking about, or today's topic is, you know, when did you first begin to think that this wasn't what you wanted anymore? Or you could, so this feels like a different, like, how would you use this? Like, what would be that night? It's 7 o'clock in the church basement. Like, when would you bring this up?
How we might frame this activity is like, so we're going to do some storytelling, and you get to pick which snapshots of your life you want to highlight. It can be your life, actually. It can be your healing journey. It can be your experiences in this group, but you really get to take the lead there. And then draw what resonates, and we can share if you want or not, and talk about why you included that. And I think part of the explanation is folks are sharing what they've drawn, or talking or sharing to the group, or like hearing back from other people on what they drew. They really get to like think on and reflect on the kind of language that they want to be able to share their story. The whole point is like honing in and building skill around sharing your story, and getting to take the lead on that, because oftentimes people's stories are told to them.
Right.
And so it's really reclamation, right? It's
Yeah.
retelling, reclaiming.
Reclaiming our stories. Well, that goes right into the next slide. It's like magic.
Oops.
So allowing stories to emerge. And these, the photos here, the first one is from among the Hmong people, who are mountain people of China, Laos, and mostly Laos, who have a tradition around embroidery, and then people have used that tradition to share what happened to them. So this is a scene that somebody made this incredible embroidery cloth of soldiers coming to the village and burning the village, and then shooting people. And you know, I can just imagine that for somebody to make this art is you know, it's a different process to tell the story this way than to talk about it in a support group. And then this other piece that you have here, Alma, was this your piece?
Yeah, this is,
And can you just read what it says?
it says, it has 2 hands with the thumbs touching, and it says her feet off the floor on each finger, her feet off the floor, and the other hand says his hands around her neck. And I consider that another advocacy piece that I just needed to get out, because I've heard so many stories of what used to be called choking, but it's really strangulation. And I just had to get that out, because it's a disturbing image for me. And I also thought that it could bring some light to some of the dynamics that happen.
I love how you're using this also for your own trauma-informed practice.
Yes,
Not just drinking in the parking lot.
right.
So, yeah.
I've found through the years that I actually will tell you right now I'm in that retirement phase of my life where I feel like I can no longer do, I'm doing domestic violence service work, but I can no longer do direct service. As a longtime advocate, I'm not filtering as I used to. I'm not able to keep the secondary trauma away from me, because in my retired life, I'm opening up through doing my art and creative projects and getting a lot of healing. And so that's the area that my life as a former advocate is shifting. Once an advocate, always an advocate. Like I said earlier, the passion is always going to be there. But I encourage all of you to think about your futures too, so you can work as long as you want to and help people, but also do as much self-love and reclamation of your own sacred self. You were born sacred, and most of us, because of domestic violence, sexual assault, society, oppression, we don't believe that anymore. We have forgotten. And I do know that my role now is the rememberer, and I would like to help you remember that you were born sacred too, and that when you're working with your program participants, hold that out for them. We all need to remember that.
Thank you, Alma. We should do another time just to do that with advocates. So we've got a couple questions. We're going to thank you. Keep writing in your questions, and we're going to go through a few more slides and then get to your really important comments. Okay. So here are just some examples of what people have done. So there's this collage work, which is, really low barrier. It's just like youth magazines and scissors and glue, and then we have some of this amazing mask work, which is much more complicated than that. Looks like it's paper mache, and then people have done like the mask on the outside, and then what's really going on for them written on the inside. So some of the words on the inside of the mask. So on the outside is everything's, roses, everything's flowers. On the inside of the mask it says something like, "You're nothing. There's something wrong with you. What did I tell you?" And hate. So that, anyone want to say anything about these, like a creative healing group? So one of the questions that Rosia had was, does anyone have a group? Yes, there's two of our member programs that I know of have these groups. One of them is API Chaya. The other one is the Northwest Network, both in Seattle. And anybody else know about? Are you doing a art group at? Okay.
We are about to start our support group at Mother Beach.
Oh, great. Okay. Something else about this is that, well, it doesn't have to be fancy. So can you tell us about, for someone who doesn't feel like I can do some of this stuff, but I'm not the fancy one. So why is this important?
This is one of my favorite activities that we do, or that I used to do as a facilitator. This actually comes from the book Managing Traumatic Stress Through Art, which is a incredible resource if you're just getting into, like, how do I integrate art, and like,
what was the resource?
It's called Managing Traumatic Stress Through Art. It's a book we often refer to for our support group, for just perusing activities and being able to, it has like instructions, guiding questions. It gives a really great frame and rationale for, like, here's how we're addressing this part of like trauma recovery or navigating through this kind of experience. And so this is like one of the first activities that it suggests doing. And I can talk about like what it is it's drawing the movements of our breath. And so the instructions would ask, say, participants in a group to close their eyes if they'd like. We're going to do 2 lines. The first line, we're just going to focus on our breathing normally, drawing the inhales and exhales, we might do that for 30 seconds. And then the second line, we're going to be breathing in calm and breathing out tension. And so you might see, you might do that for 30 seconds. After you've done those two lines, we would have a series of questions. We dropped the phone. We'd have a series of questions that folks can discuss about how that process was for them. You might ask, what are the similarities between that first focused breathing and that second more targeted breathing around calm and tension? How do the lines reflect different levels of stress that you're feeling? How would drawing your breath differ if you were, say, not thinking about tension, but thinking about petting a dog or being in a field of flowers? Okay. Wait. Are we, can people hear us better now? Yes. Okay, great. Sorry about that. Oh, could people not hear? Yeah. People could not hear. No. Okay.
Let's just go back to so there's this book called,
we'll talk about the book again.
Managing Traumatic Stress Through Art. I'm not sure what point no worries.
Okay.
All good.
Okay.
Managing our traumatic stress.
Did we get through the activity? I can just talk about the activity again.
Yeah.
So the first line would be folks drawing a line where they're just focused on their breathing as normal. And the second line would be breathing in calm and breathing out tension. You would give folks about 30 seconds to do both of those. And then there would be a series of questions that you can have so people can discuss how that experience was for them. You might ask about the similarities between the first line and the second line, the differences. Was one line more dramatic than the other? What were folks thinking about in their normal breathing? And how might those lines differ if you were thinking about your breath while you were like petting a dog or walking through a field of flowers or sitting at home drinking tea? So just thinking about that. And this is also where it's also where a lot of the like breaking the ice and getting to know people and just being able to have some lighter discussion can happen, and where validation can also happen, where people might share that like, I'm actually feeling really tense. I don't like breathing out tension, and so my lines are really ragged. So you can just, it's a simple way to introduce art without necessarily feeling like you have to be totally good at it. There's less pressure, say.
There are, as I said earlier, this is Alma, there are a lot of what's called art interventions or art projects that you can find on list, but a lot of them have to do with expression of the inside and what it looks like on the outside. We're often just the act of creating, again, is movement. It's constant movement and change, and so you can use really any kind of expression, even healing arts. I integrate the healing arts into my groups by bringing vibrational medicine to the group.
When you say medicine, do you mean like cells?
When I say medicine, I'm talking about tools that help people recover from hurt.
So not like medicine like from a drugstore.
Right, not drugstore, no.
Like ideas.
My medicine is the creating.
Yeah, got it.
Yeah, no pills or anything like that. Vibrational medicine, I bring singing bowls, tuning forks, different activities around. Oh, I have a big gong that people do clearing with, and those kinds of tools can be integrated into your intentional art projects as well. You want to create an environment of safety, so I go back to the principles, my guiding principles: safety first, creating a safe environment. Autonomy, art is great for autonomy. Now, the perpetrator accountability and the old guidelines of old school, it may not seem like art would be that perpetrator accountability or accountability would be a part of that, but it actually comes out naturally through the expression of demanding accountability for a lot of the artists or people participating.
That's really deep. So what I just want to make sure I understand, Alma. So what I hear you saying is that, you know, so often people want somebody to say, I'm sorry what happened to you, and I shouldn't, and I'm sorry that I did that to you. And even though that might not happen out in the world, that even just by the act of expressing what happened, like the truth of it, that somehow that also creates a sense of accountability?
Yes.
Okay. So, you know, one of the things that I really appreciate is this beautiful work that you did.
Oh, this was in
Alma.
the Northwest Network.
Oh, this is, I'm sorry, the Northwest Network. This is like DOS?
And
What is
Alma
that?
original.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah, so it says participant work, but it's actually Alma Goddard's work, and you did this with DOS?
No, circle.
With circles. That,
Called
you know,
Rainbow Life.
Rainbow Life, oh, that's beautiful. That when we, you know, in terms of the trauma-informed practice, that one of the things we know around recovering from trauma is that that it's about healing and resilience, and not just about you know, that somehow magically we can make what happened go away.
Right.
Right? And that healing and resilience, we're always looking for ways to incorporate that into our advocacy work, and not just do you need, you know, some of the very important things that people need that are really practical, like housing, protection orders, you know, those are all important. But the healing, the inner healing work is also important. And it's hard to do that, you know, when we're, as advocates, when we're just so busy helping people. So I love how this could be a tool to incorporate into group. So the last part, just before we get to questions, is, you know, some more examples of how to build on cultural traditions. So another, you know, another project that people can look up online is this bandana project, and how to use it if working in communities where this would resonate, you know, where this makes sense. If that's something that's true for you, you know, definitely look that up online. And then this wood carving, traditional wood carving that one of our board members, Dave Jackson, has been a part of leading out at Quileute tribe in the peninsula, a healing totem pole that all tribal members and other people that they invite in have participated in. Anything else you want to say about this?
In our organization, I'm a board member for Mother Nation, and it's an intertribal organization, but we utilize creativity. We're a culturally based organization. Every aspect of our work is about healing through our cultural practices, traditions, ceremony, and newer traditions, practices, and ceremonies, and it's incredibly moving work when you start where the people are and with what we already have and what we already know, and we start tapping in with our ancestors, and yeah.
Thank
so
you.
please honor your cultures. If those of you who have those tools, share them with others too.
Okay, so we got a couple of questions and comments already, and please keep typing those in. One question was, what about using physical movement? So physical movement, I guess things like maybe yoga or dance, or even just moving your body in group. And you know, is that okay? What do you think about that?
This is Marci. I can speak a little bit to it. It was never, movement specifically was never something that we used in our group, but it was also more around accessibility for the makeup of the group at the time. And so,
You mean like physical stuff?
physical accessibility, yes. And so ways, though, to incorporate movement that doesn't necessarily compromise someone's like ability to feel well in the space. We would do meditations that could incorporate some arm movement. Stretching is always, we always make that, like we tell people to take care of themselves through the group. If that means standing up and having to walk or pace around, that's totally fine. It wasn't necessarily like this is an art-based, healing-based thing that we're doing right now. It was never named that, but that's something that we just tell folks they can do.
Great, thank you. We also have, Rocio says, ooh, a karate instructor comes and teaches self-defense in her group. That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And then Debbie Elias says that she uses Tai Chi in her group.
Wow.
So like, which is like a slow,
Yeah.
like kind of like a slow self. That's kind of some of that breathing and physical work too. That's really super.
Yeah, I would never count it out. I think that based on what your group makeup is and what folks feel really comfortable doing and feel like is accessible for them, that's like, I would totally invite that.
I would go to that.
Yeah.
Okay, somebody else, Debbie also said that she does work around plants, like they have plants and horticulture, which I love that. It makes me think of the work that Griselda Orozda was doing out at Sage. I know some of our participants today are from Sage, that she was doing with some farm worker women around having a group that was, that they had a community garden space so that participants could say, you know, one, that they could grow food for their families, but also that they could say to their partners, oh, I'm going to to do this to my gardening group. Now I'm going to support group to learn how to deal with you. So,
Wow.
so we have a Wiscative, if you go to our YouTube channel, you can see Griselda's video on her gardening group. And then there was another question, Deidre, I'm not sure who it's from, about supplies, getting money for supplies. A donation?
Tammy Nicholson?
From Tammy. Two things. Like we're gonna talk in just a minute here about where you can get stuff. But also for those of you in Washington State, the Victims of Crime Act, VOCA, the VOCA grants are available right now. Like you can apply, your programs can apply for them right now with OCVA, Office of Crime Victims Advocacy. And Wiscative and WICSAP and others have been working really hard with OCVA to share the kind of creative advocacy that a lot of you are doing or wanting to do, and they've been responsive to that. So there is, I really would encourage you to include in your VOCA grants that you want to do, this kind of support group, and that you need money for these kinds of supplies. And we're seeing that there are other programs that have gotten funds to do, for example, a yoga group, or other kind of traditional or alternative healing practices.
Great question.
Yeah, awesome questions. Thanks. Okay.
Thrift story.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. Any more questions, Dee? Okay. So practical tips. Let's talk about where to get stuff. So Alma, you said thrift stores.
In the past, we've received donations from like Blick, which is a local art store in Seattle on the Hill, and sometimes they'll have like expired or close to expiring products. And if you just give them a call and are like, do you have any? We're with a DV organization and we have an art-based group or a group that does a lot of art-based activities. Do you have anything that's about to expire or that you'd be able to donate to our group? And more often than not, those art stores are more than happy to provide.
Because they have to pay
Yeah.
for their garbage.
Yes.
So what about like Michael's? Do you ever get something donated from the Michael's craft chain?
We've actually never reached out to Michael's before, but that's
Well, I haven't done a group in a while, so when we used to just go to the toy store, we used to just go to the toy stores for our art
The toy
supplies.
store?
Yeah.
Awesome.
There's a toy store up in the north end of Seattle that has a lot of very
That's a great idea.
creative stuff.
Okay, so VOCA, use your VOCA grants, your DSHS supplies, your supply budget.
But places like Lowe's, and places like Michael's,
Like home supply.
Home Supplies, Home Depot, whatever, they have, although I don't eat them, they have, clearance areas, and I often will go to the paint, section of Lowe's and see what colors of paint they have that I can buy for $1, you know, sample paint, or they have paint that's been brought back. And so
That's a great idea because they have to pay, because that's considered hazardous waste.
right.
So they have to pay to dispose it.
So you can
Yeah.
also ask other artists. And there are free art supplies. You can Google and find free art supplies and free art events to go and do free art. In Seattle anyway. I'm not so sure of the other places, but.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so it doesn't have to be complicated. Can you tell us about, let's see, actually, these are from some other member programs that I don't know if they're on the call today, but I love some of the work that's happening at the YWCA in Spokane with their support groups, that they're like coloring rocks. How do you do this rocks thing? Is it just paint and then do you put nail polish on it or what?
You can use nail polish, you can use any kind of paint. I do a lot of dot work on those, and you just use some little bit of paint, and you can use the back of a pencil or any kind of thing that makes dots.
So you use the pencil eraser as your brush
Yeah.
to make dots?
Yeah,
onto
a lot of
stone?
creating, you can go down to the shore side and find your rocks and, you know, slap a little paint on them is very satisfying. For me, the act of finding the rocks is more special actually than painting the rocks, because sometimes I'll look for heart rocks. And those are good even for you as an advocate if you want to go down to your local rock quarry and utilize that for your own healing. Like, I think it's very healing looking for rocks that are shaped like hearts, for example.
Yeah, well, there's definitely the one that says
Yeah, they
love.
have that one.
So the rocks say heal, love, and balance. And that makes me think about people who, you know, might want to put that in their pocket for their day, right? And then
Changing your vibration,
Yeah.
that changes your vibration.
And I love how, like, these composition notebooks that are, you know, $2 or $3 at the drugstore, that you can make a journal out of that and decorate it yourself. And then amazing that at the Y they're doing jewelry too, which is so amazing. So can you talk about, like, how do you attract people to this? Like, how do you frame it so that people aren't like, I don't know what you're talking about, I can't do art, or like, I just need help with domestic violence. Like, what are you talking about? So how do you find, does this attract people in a different way? How do you advertise?
Well, folks, when we're talking about this in particular, what you have on here is our more screened group, and also.
So you screen people in.
Yes, we screen people in both our DV support group and Thriving While Healing, which is our sexual assault support group. But this is more skill-based, and there is a curriculum, and it's a finite amount of time, right? So it's 9 weeks. Our DV support group, most folks are just, I would say that a big part of that group is for people to break isolation, and I think people are just hanging on and thirsty to do some of that engagement, and that can happen through art. People naturally are pretty hesitant if they don't feel that it comes easily, but we do a lot of that framing work. And I think it's also really important that our facilitators are also doing that art with people in the group as well. So we're also engaging in that process
Oh, I didn't know that.
with people most of the time. And so and so being able to say, like, maybe this is like the purpose of the activity. We're really going to be talking about storytelling this group, and we want to we'll do it by doing this activity. And if you find that it's challenging along the way, then say it's challenging along the way, and we can talk it out, or we can talk with our peers and find that it's challenging for everybody, and it can just be challenging. We can sit with that and talk about it next week, or talk about it now, or it just becomes a facilitator conversation too.
I love how that makes you appear more mature, even while still holding the space. Hey, we've got some great suggestions. Is it okay if I?
Yeah.
Okay. Because we have some great suggestions. I love this about where you can get supplies. So Teresa Dixon says, if you simply ask your community, there are many people who have art supplies they're not using. Yes, I have a lot of supplies in my house that I thought I would use because I was ambitious, but then they're just sitting there. So people might donate those. And then Teresa at the Y says rock art can be created with acrylic pens or Sharpie markers.
Yes.
Yes. And Sharpies come in all different colors now. Yeah. And then Britta says, if your agency has a wish list on its website, you can put art supplies there so that people can donate art supplies, and along with like diapers and food and stuff.
Great
suggestion.
Yeah, it's awesome. And then about the rock art, she says you can use metallic permanent markers. Woo, sparkly. And then paint pens, which come in a lot of different sizes on Amazon. And then Teresa also says if you're buying supplies, if you do it during back to school time in September, there's a lot of discounts on things like markers and watercolors and composition books. And then Debbie says that gardening stores and is a great resource for getting plants donated. And then Trader Joe's and other stores will donate, like grocery stores will donate flowers that are day old.
Wow.
Awesome.
Wow.
Thank you.
Amazing.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I love it. Advocates, power of advocates, you're very smart. Okay, any more questions or comments? We're going to wrap up here in a few minutes. I guess one thing that I'm curious about is, are there topics that you would like more of on this topic of creative expression and support groups and trauma? Are there things that you would like to have more training on or more resources? And I'm curious if anyone else has used this. What was that book? Managing
It's an amazing
traumatic stress through art. Ooh, drawing from the center. Ooh, that's amazing. Okay. Any more comments or questions, Dee? Okay. So I want to give special thanks to everyone whose art and creative work was featured in this webinar. Alma, Goddard, API Chaya, DV Services of Snohomish County, the Northwest Network, and the National Institute on LGBTQ Interpersonal Violence, New Hope in Moses Lake, the Quileute Tribe, New Beginnings Program and their wood carving shed, the YWCA of Spokane, and then all the survivors who anonymously shared their work. Just as we wrap up here, and then we can have some closing comments. For your attendance and evals, please fill out the evaluation form and then tell us who attended on your end of things so that you can get your training certificate. And thank you very much. So closing, any words of wisdom, please share Alma and Marci.
This is Alma. And earlier I talked about the fact that you were born enough and whole and complete, basically born sacred. And I just wanted to say that that means born sacred, how I define sacred is considering ourselves worthy of the deepest respect, connections, and love. And I consider all of you sacred. Thank you.
I think that was captured beautifully, and I just want to reiterate that I'm not someone who considers myself an artist, but I do engage in this process because I think if we're asking the same thing of our peers and the people we're working with, that we can ask that of ourselves as well. And I would just encourage people to challenge themselves, and it's totally possible. You can do it. Thank you. Thank you, Judy, for really making this happen and getting the gang back together.
Yeah. Thanks all of you. Britta I wanted to share what Britta said. As spring is coming, this is a great time, or hopefully it's here. This is a great time to do flower pressing. And that's free. It's super easy. You can just take flowers and, press them in books with paper towels and stuff, and that's a great activity. So thanks, Britta. Super thank you to our interpreters today, to the transcriber for deaf participants, to Jasmine and Kayla on our administrative operations team, Deidre, who's been monitoring the chat box, and to Marci and Alma for sharing your wisdom of experience here. Most of all, thank you to all of you advocates. We love and appreciate you and the work that you do every day with survivors and in community for healing and liberation, and we just appreciate you. See you soon. Bye.